the Republicans have tried to come up with something which is equally as horrendous and alarming to try and throw, I think, some chaff into the argument that Trump was the most dangerous president that America has ever seen, the biggest threat to democracy.
Now, the race between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump continues with just a month until voting gets underway. I'm joined now by the Times' Assistant US Editor David Charter to unpack today's biggest stories in the election campaign. Hello, David.
Hello, Hugo. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Thanks for being with us. So, look, Tuesday night's vice presidential debate saw a strong performance from experienced public speaker J.D. Vance, the Republican VP pick. Democrat Tim Walz found his footing when Vance couldn't give him an answer on the January 6th Capitol attack.
He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment.
David Charter, was there a clear winner to these debates a couple of days on?
I think you can certainly call the win for Vance based on style and the way that he defied expectations, actually, because he's been built up as this Republican attack dog who was going after Kamala Harris, saying she can go to hell for saying mean things about Donald Trump, etc. And he, as I say, defied expectations and played the nice guy. Was very empathetic in his approach. When he heard from Tim Walz that Tim Walz's 17-year-old son had witnessed a shooting, Vance was saying, "Oh, I'm sorry about that. I hope he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It's awful," he said. "I appreciate you saying that," said Walz. So it was a very disarming approach that I think probably won him some admirers. And we saw in polling afterwards that actually voters' approval ratings for both of the candidates increased quite a lot. Americans didn't know that much about either of them. And so people who were undecided were starting to make a view, and they liked what they saw. And to be honest, in the aftermath of the debate, a lot of the discussion has been about the level of civility that they managed to have for an hour and a half without insulting each other and name calling, which was a feature of the debate between the principals, between Harris and Trump. They both really went for the jugular after each other. In the way that we've come to expect politics to be conducted in America in the Trump era. And these guys, well, they not only managed a hearty handshake, they introduced the wives to each other and seemed to be getting on like a house on fire afterwards.
It's a low bar, isn't it? Or it's become one. Look, I think that sort of little, it's not quite a spat, but that debate we heard them having just there in the clip. I think we all know what happened in the January the 6th Capitol attack. Vance's sort of counterattack about Kamala Harris censoring people during COVID. What's going on there? What's that all about?
Well, first of all, the Republicans have tried to come up with something which is equally as horrendous and alarming to try and throw, I think, some chaff into the argument that Trump was the most dangerous president that America has ever seen, the biggest threat to democracy. Well, in recent months and years, actually, and also fueled by Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter and turning it into something else a little bit, there's been this conspiracy theory that the deep state has got a hold of the means of communication in America, and that debate is stifled, and people on the right do not get a fair crack of the whip. And when they try and speak out and communicate what is really going on in the country, they are prevented and
Right.
barred. I think it's I think it's very overdone. I do think we know that, especially during that very hot phase of January 2021, that Facebook and Twitter were moderating Trump and others. But that they did that. Their motives, they say, were pure. They were trying to stop the whole country igniting into
Yeah.
conflagration.
Yeah.
So you know, it's up. But it is an argument that's pushed by the Trump people,
Yeah.
to suggest that it's an equally dangerous development in American democracy,
Understood.
which it isn't.
Understood. Look, escalation obviously continues in the Middle East, with Israeli airstrikes killing 6 in Beirut overnight. Joe Biden has announced he will not support Israel if they target Iranian nuclear sites. How much power does that statement hold when his days in office are so obviously numbered?
Well, unfortunately for Joe Biden, one of his great claims, one of his great qualifications to be president, was his fantastic international experience and his influence over other world leaders who he knew very well. And he does know Netanyahu very well, but he's fundamentally been unable to restrain Israel's attacks, preemptive attacks as well, against its enemies. And there's a very long piece in the Washington Post, which I think was probably briefed heavily by the White House, sort of talking about what influence the Biden administration has been able to have over Israel, but it's pretty small beer, really, in the face of the widening war in the Middle East. They do talk up their influence in having the one brief ceasefire that was quite late last year now. It seems such a long time ago when some of the hostages were released. But there hasn't been a ceasefire since then. And we hear Biden calling for a ceasefire almost every time he's asked about the Middle East situation. And his influence has dwindled to considerably. He does obviously have the ability to cut off the supply of weapons to Israel, but he's threatened that, and he very briefly put a pause on some of the strongest weapons when they wanted to defend Rafah. If you remember, there was a big push that did have some success, while so many people from Gaza were bunched up in seeking refuge in Rafah. But again, it's a pretty small, if you like, achievement along a road which has seen many tens of thousands of people killed.
Yeah.
I mean, again, in this article, they're talking about how the rate of Palestinian citizens being killed has come down in recent months. Well, yeah, but tens of thousands have been killed. So it's held against Biden by a lot of natural Democrat supporters, and has been very corrosive to him, and was perhaps one reason why we saw such low approval figures for him, and may even have contributed to the push to get him out.
Finally, David, in other election news, Republican Ted Cruz is fighting to hold his seat in Texas, while his Democrat opponent is supported by none other than Liz Cheney. Cheney became a vocal anti-Trump Republican following January the 6th and went on to lose her seat in 2020 to a Trump-backed candidate. Tell us a bit about what's going on there.
Well, Texas is the state where Democrats, every election season, they do talk up their chances of finally turning Texas blue, and it never happens. But I have to say, in this case, they do seem to be inching a bit closer to a surprise, and it would be a surprise if Ted Cruz, a very prominent Republican senator who was basically the runner-up to Donald Trump in the 2016 primary, if he was to be ousted by Colin Allred, who's a former linebacker and popular former American football player turned politician, who's campaigning strongly. And the reason it's got a lot of attention is twofold. One, you mentioned that Liz Cheney, the former congresswoman who was hounded out for trying to hold Trump to account for January the 6th, she's been supporting him and campaigning. But also one of the opinion polls, an independent opinion poll, did put Allred very slightly ahead, which caused I think some chills in the Republican camp. And every 2 years we have Senate races, and of course they're in office for 6 years, so it's 1/3 of the map. And the map this time is very, very favorable to the Republicans. It looks like they're going to pick up 2 or even 3 seats to take control of the Senate. And so we're going to see a lot of Democrat efforts on the most likely pickup for them does look like Texas, even though, as I say, if Texas flatters to deceive for the Democrats. They keep thinking they're going to win there. And when it comes to shove, Texans vote red. But it will get a lot of attention in the next few weeks because it's Ted Cruz,
Thank you.
Who's such a Marmite character over here.
Thank you very much indeed, David Charter, Assistant US Editor of The Times. Always a pleasure.
So we are off back on our road to the White House, our regular feature when we're talking to movers, shakers, players in American politics in the run-up to the presidential election on November the 5th. There'll be 4 live shows. We're bringing you 4 live shows from November the 4th from stateside. We're going to be in the state of Pennsylvania. We're going to be talking to lots of people there. It's all part of our build-up to the decision in America to choose the next president.
The power is with the people. Are you ready to get to work?
The road to the White House.
I had God on my side. I felt
that. On Times Radio.
And the latest development in that contest was the TV debate between the presidential running mates, Tim Walz on the Democratic side and J.D. Vance, the Republican. It was, in many ways, surprisingly cordial. It was they got on at times even rather well in what's been such a bitter contest. I mean, Tim Walz, just to pick an example, he did, though, make 1 or 2 slip-ups.
October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
Well, that's a tiny bit of the debate last night. Let's then talk to and welcome a former leader in Minnesota politics, Paul Gazelka, who was the majority Republican senator in the state between 2017 and 2021. Welcome to you.
Yeah, John, it's really good to be on your show. And yeah, I was the leader of Minnesota's Senate. I was the only one in opposition to Governor Tim Walz. He's a Democrat. I was Republican. And so I had to navigate with him through the riots after the death of George Floyd, all the things related to COVID and many, many other things. And so I wrote the book Behind the Veil that you can get on Amazon.com to learn about that. And I was actually surprised that they really didn't talk about his record last night in the debate.
What about the tone of it? Let me ask you about that first of all. It's been such an unpleasant debate, and last night was almost cordial.
I loved it, John. I mean, that's kind of how I am in Minnesota. It reminded me of the days of Ronald Reagan. Definitely tough national defense, but cordial. He built a relationship with Mikhail Gorbachev, and they ended up tearing down the wall. The relationship with Margaret Thatcher was critical. But we haven't seen that from Trump and Harris. But definitely last night, you saw what could be the future.
Indeed. I mean, it is generally widely thought, not universally, but widely thought that the Republican, J.D. Vance, did quite well out of it. He is so much a polarizing figure, so much raises hackles among his opponents and some neutrals. And because Tim Walz didn't go for him, didn't go for the jugular, it almost normalized him. Is that a fair reading?
Yeah, I think the fact is, I think he was more normalized. I think he was more what Americans look for. But, you know, when you're in a campaign, both sides really try to demonize the other one. The media really didn't help. But the fact that Walz has done virtually no interviews, same thing with Harris, and Vance and Trump do them every day. And frankly, I think that's part of the reason that Vance did so well last night and Walz did not. But like I said, they didn't really talk about his record, and that's why I wrote the book Behind the Veil, because it really talks about Tim Walz' leadership in a crisis. And I think that matters because I think Harris is a fairly weak leader. So Walz is going to have way more influence than I think the average VP would.
All right, let's talk about your former opponent in Minnesota, Tim Walz, the running mate to Kamala Harris. He's described, isn't he, by Donald Trump and even by J.D. Vance as a dangerous, radical socialist. I mean, is that fair? Is that remotely accurate?
I would say that both Harris and Walz are farther left than we've ever had for candidates for the presidential position. He was a congressman in a very rural district in Minnesota, and so his voting record was moderate. But as soon as he became governor, all of his policies were extreme far left.
Extreme far left.
Yeah. I just stopped him for 4 years, but in 2023, Democrats took the House, Senate, and governor, and he passed many of the things that I say are extreme far left.
Well, okay, the stuff that Tim Walz likes to talk about are things like helping with tuition fees for young people in education in Minnesota, maybe help with poor families, free school meals in schools. Would you account that as dangerous socialism?
No, he gave free lunch and breakfast to all children in Minnesota, but that comes with a price tag. Prior to that, we paid for free lunches for kids that could not afford it. What I mean by extreme far left, like clean energy, we all want more clean water and clean air, but they passed standards in Minnesota that said by 2040, all utilities have to have 100% renewable or clean energy. And it doesn't work in Minnesota. Wind and solar, if it's 22 below Fahrenheit or colder, and it can get to 60 below, that doesn't work. Solar doesn't work well when it's cloudy. And we don't have enough baseload power. Nuclear, in this case, we just don't have enough. So by the time we get there, that won't work. On abortion, Walz went completely to 9 months, no exceptions, and he wiped out all of the compromised positions that we had between Republicans and Democrats. For example, funding, if a young mother wanted to have the baby, we provided funding to help her become successful. If the baby was born in a botched abortion, that doctor had to help treat that baby. They took that language away as well. So that's why I mean by extreme left. Same thing with small businesses. There's more policies there as well. Yeah,
I just want to pick up on one of the points you make there. We could, I guess, go through individual policies almost infinitely. But the former president, Donald Trump, and J.D. Vance have argued, both of them, very loudly, very publicly, that Democrats support the idea of being able to kill a baby born after 9 months, a 9-month term. Looking at it from here, I see compelling evidence. There's no such provision. That is illegal across the United States.
So what I would say is in 2010, a Democrat governor, Dayton, and Republicans, of which I was one, passed a bill called the Born Alive Act, which simply said if the abortion was botched and the baby's born alive, the doctor had to do everything they could to try to save that baby. In 2023, that language was completely removed by Tim Walz. And same thing with, the Positive Alternative Act provided money for a young woman for resources for a crib and counseling and all the things that she might need to help that baby be supported. That also was removed in 2023 by Tim Walz when he had complete control of the House, Senate, and governor. And so that's why I say it's extreme. And then on small business, the paid family leave he talked about last night, in Minnesota, if you're an employer with one employee, your employee can have up to 20 weeks off every single year under paid family leave. And that would be if somebody abused the system, but it doesn't work for small business. And that's why Minnesota is not a business-friendly state. None of the business organizations would say that. And all of these are examples that I write about in the book Behind the Veil, because it's policies he wrote, it's spending that he did out of control. And then the biggest thing is in a crisis, he doesn't know how to lead well.